Awesome. So hi, everyone, and welcome to How to Find the Best Fit Funders in Under 60 Minutes. This is a special workshop just for those of you in the Boss on a Budget community. So thank you so much for joining us. This workshop is being recorded, and slides and the recording will also be shared with you after. So just definitely keep your eyes open for an email from me later today in case you want to review anything or maybe share something with someone else at your organization. You'll have access to all of that. If you haven't already, go ahead and share in the Zoom chat. I really like these sessions to be as interactive as possible, so feel free to drop questions throughout. I do just ask that you put 3 hashtags in front of any questions that you write. That way I can make sure that I can find them and answer them. Otherwise, sometimes they get a little lost in the chat. So, but feel free to ask questions, jump in, tell me, amen, that sounds like me, or I don't know if I agree. I really want this to be interactive, and having your perspective is so helpful to me, but also to everyone else who's here on this session today. So, all right, so a little bit about me, since we're all sharing in the chat. I am Celia. I run partnerships for Instrumentl, and that means that I lead special webinars like this one for our partners like Boss on the Budget, as well as our regular workshop series. If you're not familiar, we do have a regular workshop series. We cover all kinds of topics from your relationship to money, to how to write a budget, to how to write an LOI, how to manage post-award grants, sort of anything related to nonprofit fundraising. So check out, I just dropped in the chat, check out our upcoming event calendar and see if there's anything relevant for you in there. But I run these workshops, and the goal of these workshops are they're free educational workshops. We tackle a problem that grant professionals often have to solve while sort of sharing along the way some different processes, tools, and systems that we can use to tackle them. Along the way, I'm going to show you a little bit about the Instrumentl platform, how we use it to do some of this stuff. However, everything that I'm sharing today is doable with or without Instrumentl. I just find that Instrumentl makes us all go a little bit quicker, and I will show you how to do all of that. A little background on Instrumentl. Some of you have never heard of us. We help over 2,000 nonprofits with their institutional fundraising. So Instrumentl is a platform where we bring together grant prospecting, tracking, and management. So all of that under one roof. And I will show you why that is so helpful here in a little bit. But what that means is that every day we're talking to grant writers, we're talking to executive directors, other fundraisers at nonprofits, and we hear over and over, what are the big blocks that they run into? What are the big challenges that they run into? And so our goal with this webinar and all of our other webinars is to really kind of tackle that and pull all of that apart. Good to see you, Cecilia. Good name, by the way. All right. So I would love to hear in the chat if any of what I am about to read through resonates with you. You can give me like an amen, you can give me an emoji, just drop it in the chat there. But maybe you are feeling a little ill-prepared in your organization's ability to consistently find the best fit funders and apply for grants. Or maybe you are actually just feeling overwhelmed by the list of to-dos. Maybe you found all those good fit funders, and now when you sit down and you see your to-do list, it is so overwhelming, right? You've got to you got to find the opportunity, then you've got to vet the opportunity, or maybe actually you need to decide whether or not the bandwidth is there. And then you got to actually apply for it and deal with the reporting. So all of that can be a lot. Yeah, I see a lot of agreed, some thumbs up in the chat. Sharon and Danielle, you feel me here. Or maybe you finally just sit down at the computer and you have writer's block. You're ready to start, you're staring at a blank screen and you're just thinking, oh no, as much as I want to do this, I can think of anything else I'd rather do more, right? But whatever it is, as you can see in the chat, you're not alone. Lots of people have been here, and lots of people sort of end up after all of this kind of thinking to themselves, are grants really worth this effort? Are they worth this stress? Are they worth feeling a little bit overwhelmed? And the answer is yes, they are absolutely worth the effort. And the reason for that is we've got over 87,000 grant makers out there, right? We have 12,000 alone on Instrumentl, and that is increasing every day, right? So we add, we're adding 100 plus a week, right? And so that just goes to show you at a really macro level that there's so much opportunity out there. So regardless of what kind of project you're working on, what kind of mission you have, there are opportunities out there. I do hear from some people often that that maybe they've kind of figured it out within their locality. They've kind of ticked all the boxes when it comes to grants in their city or their county. And they're really kind of struggling to maybe expand beyond that local opportunity into something maybe more statewide or even federal, right? And the goal here is we want to always be kind of moving forward, and grants really help us do that. There's tons of opportunities out there. So something else I want to note is that things have been hard, right? This has been a rough year following a few other rough years. And what does that mean? Well, it means that nonprofits are definitely feeling the squeeze here, right? 49% of nonprofits and employees expected to see costs get cut. We also saw that a drop in individual giving campaigns, right? So there was a sort of drop as the economy has taken a little bit of a turn in some of that individual giving campaigns. But while all of that was going on, there was still a boost in foundation giving, right? And that just really underpins here the need to have a diverse kind of funding strategy, right? Remember the old saying, we don't want all our eggs in one basket. We want to think about that too when we're thinking about funding. And grants are a really nice way, if you haven't already implemented them, to really start moving towards diversifying kind of your funding strategy. Cool. All right, so that's a little bit of the high level stuff and a little bit of our housekeeping. So where are we going in the next 40 minutes or so? Well, first, I'm going to, sort of overarchingly, I'm going to help explore some helpful ways to think about this problem of prospecting, right? So we're going to start with, why are grants powerful? Why do we care? We're going to talk a little bit about what prospect research even is and why that's so important. Then I'm going to touch on some really important key questions that we can think about when we're evaluating funders for the best fit. And then finally, I'm going to sort of share how we can start actually working towards finding good fit funders with Instrumentl. There's always going to be other ways to find them. And I think you'll find that a lot of what we're talking about today is relevant regardless of whether or not you use Instrumentl. But I'm going to sort of walk you through that today too. And you'll definitely want to hang with me to the end because if you hang with me to the end, I'm going to be sharing a free 40-page guide on how to really help dial in your prospect research. Okay, so shall we get into it? This is great. Thank you so much for sharing. All right. So why are grants so powerful? Well, the first reason that grants are so powerful, one of my favorite kind of reasons here, is the broad set of opportunities that grants sort of speak to. So when we're thinking about things like individual giving campaigns, we're taking in money for sort of general purpose, right? Which is great. Who doesn't love general purpose funds? But grants are really powerful because we can dial in and we can find these opportunities that are very specific to certain projects that we have to work on. So let's say that you are doing a Meals on Wheels program and you need a new van to do that. There is a grant for that, right? So there is a grant out there that's going to be specific to that kind of capital expenditure that you need. And what that means is that we can get really granular. We can find funds without as much competition. Because if I need a grant for a van, I'm competing with a lot less people than if I'm doing a general giving campaign, for example. So that is one of my first favorite reasons about why grants are so powerful for organizations. The next reason is that foundations have to give, right? The dollars are definitely out there. So they have to give regardless of a recession, a pandemic, anything like that. And this is something that all of you should know about, which is the minimum distribution rule. And this essentially says that foundations are required to give 5% of their average market value of their net assets every year. So what does that mean? Well, it means that a sort of a portion of what they have as the value of their organization, they have to give away. And the vast majority of that is going out in the forms of grants, right? Some of it's going to admin costs and some of that other stuff, but the bulk is going to grants. So even when we're in uncertain economic times, those dollars are still going to be there, right? And one of the things that we can sort of think about here when we look at 990 data, for example, which is tax data, is we can really see what are the total assets of a grant maker. So here we are, we're looking at New York Community Trust. They're a funder. This is out of Instrumentl, but we can see that their total assets for 2019, according to their tax documents. So think of this as sort of what you would put down as your income if this was your personal tax document. This is the sort of total assets of this grant maker. And their total assets are $2.9 billion. So if we multiply that by 5% or 0.05, we can see that they are required to give almost $146 billion. So that's really powerful stuff, right? And we can actually see that they gave more than that. They gave about 172 overall, right? But this is a quick trick. As you're sort of going through, you'll see sort of these organizations and what they have to give. But you may be saying, you know, okay, Celia, great, that's 1 year. That's 1 year of funding. But another reason that grants are so powerful is that foundations are actually super consistent in their giving, right? So one thing I've seen from my side inside Instrumentl over and over again is there are multiple year horizons where foundations and other grant makers are funding repeat grantees. So they're funding the same organizations over and over. And I talk to lots of development managers or executive directors, and something that I hear from them is that they've been potentially holding on to some of these grants year after year. They've almost set up this kind of recurring stream of funding because of the consistency in their grants. And that really allows us to establish a viable channel, right? So we can start working that into our budget. We can start working it into our long-term plan to grow. And what I've noticed is that once a foundation establishes a good relationship with you, they love to continue that, right? They love to continue making an impact. And so thinking about grants is a great way to kind of hit that sort of consistent funding year over year. They also allow you to systematize, right? There are really clear steps that we can take with grants because of reporting requirements required. Most grant makers are going to require you to kind of check in and tell them how things are going. That allows us to really understand what does this process look like and dial it in and kind of really focus on impact. All right, I'm going to keep moving just so we can get to the good stuff here. So let's talk about prospect research really quickly. I would love to hear in the chat maybe kind of what you believe prospect research to be. It's always really, it's sort of an interesting topic to hear what other people think about it. But essentially, we think about prospect research a lot. It's a term that's used tons in sort of nonprofit land. But in the context specifically of grants, which is what we're talking about today, this is kind of the process of finding, assessing, and qualifying public, private, and corporate foundations to pursue more strategic and planned giving. So if you look at this chart that's up here on the screen, you can see this wheel. It's going around, right? And this is kind of the typical grant life cycle, right? So we start with finding our funding, or start with actually generating our idea. Then we find our funding, we develop our proposal, we submit our proposal, hopefully we win it, and then we have to manage the award, and then we sort of start back over, right? And we want to think about this as a life cycle. Grants are like dominoes. We want one to kind of hit the next. It's not a standalone thing. It's not one grant and then a year goes by and another grant, right? We want to kind of line these things up. And so we want to think about this as a cycle. It's kind of always moving. And so what we're talking about today is prospecting. So we're in that bottom right kind of greenish arrow here, find your funding. That is what we're talking about today. So with good prospect research, we can get away from being so reactive. I know lots of organizations out there are very reactive, hey, we're running out of money. We need money next week. And so then you start the grant, right? But we can get away from that. And instead we can get more proactive and start having a steady influx of funds that we can count on. So we can really focus on up-leveling our organization overall. So why is this important? Beyond that kind of moving towards more sustainable funding, right? Another reason comes from this quote that's up here on the screen right now. And this quote's from Network for Good. And I love this quote. It's a really good information to have, right? But essentially they did this study, and what the study showed was that almost 40% of foundations and donors in that study said that they could be giving more than they were. So essentially they just couldn't find the organizations that they needed in order to give the grants. And so what does this mean? Well, it means that we don't have to start flat-footed, right? We don't have to instead of sort of starting from scratch, we can get involved with something that already exists and kind of use that momentum, right? And this reminds me of a client that we talked to, not that long ago, who told me they were starting their own nonprofit. This client had worked prior to that for, maybe a decade as a volunteer for an organization that was sort of similar, right? And when they went out on their own, they were on Instrumentl, they were trying to find grant opportunities. They had really great programming, but really no idea of like how to start building that grant program. And that might be some of you today, right? And essentially what they found in that process was that that foundation they had worked at, that they had volunteered with for 10 years, actually made grants. And they had no idea. They'd spent 10 years volunteering there and had no idea that this organization was making grants, right? And that just goes to show you that sometimes we don't know. Sometimes there are funds and opportunities in our backyard, and we just have to kind of turn those rocks over and figure out sort of what is available out there. And that is really what I mean when I talk about the importance of prospecting. It is our job as organizations to go through the rocks, right? It's our job to turn those over and to really start understanding what is out there and moving those organizations up into greater levels of giving. So that's what we're thinking about when we're thinking about prospect research, right? Cool. So now that we know prospect research is important, we should think a little bit about what information should we be looking for as we're doing our prospect research, right? And there's a lot of information out there. I don't know how many of you have looked, but there is plenty of information out there. And so as much as it's about finding that information, it's also about learning how to sort of prioritize that information so that you don't become that person earlier in the kind of presentation that's overwhelmed by all of it, but that you can really have a clear, discerning view of, I know which 5 questions I need to answer, and then I'm going to move to the next one, right? So some things that we want to think about are things like key stats on assets and giving patterns, right? Are they giving? Who are they giving to? How often are they giving? How much are they giving, right? We want to sort of start to understand what those trends look like. We'll also want to think about who are the key people at this organization. Whenever possible, having an introduction, some kind of warm lead is always going to be easier than sort of starting from scratch. So we want to think about, do we know anybody there? One of my favorite things to do is take that list of key people, send it to my board, maybe send it to my volunteers, any other stakeholders, and sort of say, hey, do you know any of these people? Can you help me get connected to them, right? And that's a really great task to give to a board, for example. Beyond that, we want to think about those trends, the giving trends over years, right? We want to think about how can we see their interests change over time. So, when I work with development people, on their prospecting. A lot of times I tell them, kind of look at past grantees, find what projects specifically we're funding, what type of funding that was. And then we need to see if there's any overlap. Have they funded an organization in my geography? Have they funded an organization with the same mission as me? Have they funded an organization in, building out a project or a program versus maybe only focusing on something like general operating expenses or capacity building, right? So thinking about kind of the purpose of that type of funding and maybe where you fit into their sort of story and history. So the theory is, let's stay focused. Let's stay focused on funders that really, where we can see ourselves reflected in their past giving history. If I can't see myself reflected in their past giving history, it may not be a good fit. And we really need to move away from trying to kind of fit that round peg into that square hole, right? We want to get to a place where we realize there are 87,000 plus grant makers in the world. You do not need to force a fit, and you do not need to waste your time trying to force a fit. If it doesn't line up, if you don't see yourself reflected in some of the past data from that funder, we need to keep it moving. So some other areas, think about geographic focus. Maybe you're in Texas, but a foundation that you're looking at is really focused on California. Doesn't mean it's not a no-go, but it may be kind of a long shot, and we might want to deprioritize that a little bit, right? So we want to be able to see ourselves reflected there. And then the last thing is going to be sort of eligibility, right? We want to make sure we're not missing any of those details, things like, what populations you work with, what type of kind of tax, are you a 501c3, those kind of things. We want to think about those eligibility requirements, and those are usually going to be included pretty high up in an RFP, right? Okay, cool. So one thing I will say is, as you get more familiar with this, you are definitely going to have other data that you think is important. These are just a couple of ideas. This is certainly not how every organization should be thinking about this. You will have to, as you kind of get used to this process, start to identify, what are the key questions that I want to be asking in order to kind of find the right information. All right, I'm going to zoom through this stuff so that we can get to these 16 questions. Don't feel like you need to write it all down. I'm going to kind of quickly go through this. But the goal here, and what I'm kind of hoping to do with these next couple slides here, is really to help you think about what are the potential questions you could be asking. So like I said, every organization is going to be different. Everyone's questions and kind of key data is going to be a little bit different. My goal here is to kind of give you some ideas. And as you're listening to me, you might jot down one or two that really resonate with you, that you feel like, yes, that's absolutely something I need to look at later. And of course, don't feel like you can pay attention. Don't feel like you have to be taking notes. We're going to share slides. And also, if you stick with me to the end, that 40-page guide that I mentioned has our 16 questions in it. So you can always review those later, right? All right. So let's get into some of these questions, right? So we started with some of these already, right? But we want to think broadly. So we want to think about, is this grant maker aligned with us? Do they have a complementary mission to ours? The eligibility requirements that I just mentioned, we don't want to ignore those details. So things like, do they fund it all in my geography? What type of organizations do they give to? Is it just nonprofits? Do they give to corporate programs? Like, where are they kind of focused? And what we want to do here again is we're trying to very quickly determine if this could be a match and get away from going down the rabbit hole into sort of, la land and trying to make things fit that don't fit, right? We also want to think about sizing. So we want to think about what size grant is available. And this is going to be helpful because you will likely come up to a situation where you've got two great opportunities. Maybe you need $15,000 total, and one opportunity is $10,000 and one opportunity is $2,000, right? And so thinking about that sizing is going to help you prioritize. You're probably going to want to go with the larger grant to start out, right? Beyond that, we want to think about what's it used for. So this goes back to that slide I showed earlier on the kind of broad possibilities, right? But we want to think about, what is the use of these funds? What am I trying to do with these funds? Is this because I need to hire more people? Is it I need to pay for software? That might be capacity building. Are you trying to build out a new program, right? Then that might be a program thing. Do you need new technology? That might be sort of a capital expenditure, right? Or do you just need general operating expenses? Do you need to just be able to keep the lights on, right? So you want to start thinking about how you're going to use these funds and what specifically you want to use them for. And you want to make sure that the funder is open to that, and that they're not going to have kind of caveats around how you can use it. What I will say is that federal grants, state grants, they get a little bit more specific in kind of how you can use funds, whereas kind of private foundations are a little bit more open. So that's something to think about there. Beyond sort of those high level questions, we also want to ask things like, what is the median grant size of this funder? Do they typically give 10,000 or are they typically giving a much smaller number? And again, that's going to help me kind of prioritize. And how has that changed? And the key thing there that we're trying to understand is this an organization that has a long-term trajectory that could work with my organization, or are they running out of funds? Did they used to give $10,000 median and now they're doing $500 grants? Well, that might tell me that this is a kind of tapped foundation, and they're kind of on their way out, right? And so that may not be something that I want to focus on if I'm thinking about setting up those long-term relationships that are going to create that kind of regular funding for me. So we want to start thinking about kind of what those median grant amounts look like and how those have changed over time. We also want to think about some other sort of giving history questions that we want to think about. We want to think about, can I find other organizations which look like mine, right? Do I see myself reflected in that? And we talked about that a little bit. Is my geographic location historically represented, right? Once you get into this, you may find that there are lots of RFPs out there that you read, and when you're done with them, you're like, I don't really know what what this is asking me, right? And so being able to look at that giving history is going to give us a much clearer idea, right? And we're really here, we're looking for these similar past patterns of giving, because if we can find those and then we can connect ourselves to that pattern of giving, we're likely to find a better fit funder. And that's going to help us cut out that habit of forcing a bad fit. Along with this, we want to think about things like what percentage of grants go to new grantees versus existing grantees. That's going to help me understand how competitive an opportunity is today, and also how likely it is that I'm going to be able to count on those funds in the future, right? So my kind of rule of thumb is 30%. If it's less than 30% new grantees, it means it's going to be competitive. It means they're giving a very small percentage of their overall funds to new organizations every year. If it's over that 30% mark, then I think you're in a little bit of a safer zone, and you can sort of think of that as being a little less competitive. We also want to think about how the median grant amount aligns with our goals. We've kind of talked about that already. And if we can find our kind of impact areas reflected in their sort of NTE codes. So we can dive into this a little bit more here in a minute, and then perhaps some of the most important questions to ask are actually not at all around the history of the funder and more about your own organization. So we're talking a lot about this kind of looking outward, right? Looking at the funder, looking at the landscape, understanding what's out there. But maybe most importantly, we kind of need to look inward too. We need to ask ourselves, based on what this is asking me to do, based on the information the proposal is asking me to provide, do we as an organization have the internal bandwidth to meet that? Do we have the team to be able to collect past impact data and report it? Do we have the team to be able to meet reporting requirements in the future? Right? We don't want to create bad relationships with foundations because we took on a grant and now we can't meet reporting requirements. So we want to be thinking about what we're capable of as an organization and just keeping that kind of in mind as we are determining what opportunities we want to go after. Okay, so far what we have done is we have talked about kind of what grants are, why they're important. We've talked about prospect research and how we use prospect research as a way to really move foundations up into greater levels of giving. And then we've also gone through a couple of our kind of 16 questions to ask when determining fit. And again, if you didn't get all those 16 questions, that's okay. I'm going to send it to you all. You just got to stick with me to the end here. So we've gone over all of those things. And now we're at the point where I want to start sharing kind of how we're going to find good fit funders, right? But before we get into that, I want to kind of call out this quote. It's a great quote, great book. If anyone's read Atomic Habits, I'd love to hear from you in the chat. Drop like a waving emoji or something like that. It's a great book. But essentially this quote says, "You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. Your goal is your desired outcome. Your system is the collection of daily habits that will get you there." So yeah, all right, great. You have read it. That's awesome. I love hearing that people have read it. So you understand that then. If you all have read this, you know where I'm going with this. But the goal here is that we want to be creating something consistent and something that we can count on. So, I talk to development directors often, right? And recently I had somebody say something to me like, my goal next year is to 2x our funding. And I was like, okay, what are you going to do to get there? And they were like, I don't know. And that's like not a great place to start, right? You're setting an arbitrary goal, but you have no idea what it's going to take to get there. And so there's no way to know how feasible that is. You may find that there's no way to hit 2x, or you may find that you could have hit 4x, right? But you don't know if you don't have those steps. And so we really want to think about how can we set up a process where we know I need to do X, Y, and Z in order to win this grant. And therefore, if I want to win 2 grants, I need to do X, Y, and Z twice. So we want to start thinking about kind of what are these systems and these kind of steps and processes that we can put in place to kind of move the organization forward, right? And I don't want to be flippant here. I don't want to sort of make this sound like it's super easy and you just need to put a process in place. Because this is something that does take time and it's something that will require kind of regular review and commitment, frankly, to kind of setting something like this up. So as I'm going through this, I want you to just think about kind of maybe what you can integrate today and maybe what you might want to integrate in the future, right? Cool. So let's now talk about how to find good fit funders, right? How to find the best possible fit funders. That's why we're here. All right. So there's a couple of ways to do this, right? There's lots of different sort of databases out there that are going to help you find the right fit funders. I think the easiest way is with Instrumentl. I'll tell you why. I'll show you how. But you can also use Google. There's great on funder websites. If you know a specific funder, you can absolutely find opportunities there. If you are comfortable with 990 tax data and doing that, you can go through the IRS. You can start digging through that tax data. That's probably like, I would say like level 2 potentially. And then there's other paid databases out there for sure. But regardless of what you use, what you should be thinking about in terms of finding good fit funders as fast as possible is finding clean data that makes it easy to understand what's going on, right? That means only active opportunities. It's really unhelpful when you go to these databases and they show you a ton of grant opportunities that have not been active for 5 years. It's like, great, what a waste of my time, right? So we want to make sure it's active, and we want to make sure that there's clear, that we can clearly understand kind of what the giving history looks like of that funder and what their focus is, right? So those are the things we want to think about as
Hello?
Hello? Go ahead and mute yourself if you haven't already. I'll go ahead and mute you. There we go. Okay, got it. All right, so some of the reasons I love Instrumentl, we only have active opportunities for you. We've got all that tax 990 data. We're pulling it out. We're going to visualize it for you, which means you get the benefit of that without having to do math or read through somebody's bad handwriting on like a badly scanned PDF. That's all going to be at your fingertips. I'll show you what that looks like. We also have a matching algorithm. So you're going to set up your project, and our matching algorithm is going to start pulling the best possible options for you. And when you need a break, when you've got to focus on, one of your other 6 jobs as part of your organization, that is going to still be working for you in the background. So it's kind of like a personal assistant there, right? It's going to be working for you always. Beyond that, once you kind of get through that process of just looking, we've got a great way to kind of track everything that's going on, collaborate with your team. And this means that all of that data related to grants is going to be in one place, and you can very easily just kind of plug somebody in. They can see all those steps that we are, of course, creating because we're thinking about this as a process. And we can plug even volunteers in and give them very specific tasks, and they have all the information they need in one place. So that's a little bit about Instrumentl. From here, what I'd like to do is show you all just kind of how easy this is. So I like this to be interactive. I would love for you all to follow along with me. If you don't want to, that's fine too. You can just kind of watch what I'm doing. But this, if you go ahead and click that link that I just dropped in the chat, this is where you all are going to be able to set up your own list of good fit funders today. So I'll show you how to set up projects. And at the end of today, you will have a free list of good fit funders. If you find that you love Instrumentl, you can go ahead and subscribe once your 14 days free is up, which everyone's getting today. And if you don't, you can take that list of good fit funders with you into the future as you kind of continue working on that. So go ahead and click on that link, and you can follow along with me. And then we'll make sure that you get your own list of good fit funders. So you're going to click on that link. You're going to hit try 14 days free. And you're going to end up on a page that looks like this. And I am going to kind of follow along with you all here. So let me make my screen a little bit bigger too, because I don't see great. And I know that sometimes on screens, people don't see so good either. So I'm going to start working on this. Give me a little like wave in the chat, or like a thumbs up in the chat when you get through like the first stage, just so I can kind of keep track of where everybody's at here. So I'm going to tell Instrumentl a little bit about myself, and that I am, so just going to sort of set up my account here, give them my number, and then I'm going to tell them what type of organization I am. This is an important thing to note. Instrumentl is best for US-based 501c3 organizations with 90K or above in operating revenue, and consultants that work with those folks, right? So you're going to want to include that. If that's not you, I would still say watch and follow along, because there's a lot of good information here in terms of just like the process. But you will find that if you're not a US-based 501c3 with 90K or above in operating revenue, I suggest that you think about some other options as well for finding opportunities here. So I'm going to tell them a little bit about myself. This is going to be Celia's account is the name, or Celia's nonprofits as the name of my organization today. And then I will tell them some more here. I'm going to hit next. I'm going to end up on this page. So give me a little thumbs up if you're following along with me, and just so that I can kind of wait on you. Don't want to rush anybody through here. But so here I am on the sort of schedule a strategy page. Go ahead and schedule something. This is going to be a chance to chat with one of our team members, our consultants. Thank you, Darlene. And this is a great way to set up, that's okay. If you're fiscally sponsored, that works too. You might go ahead and just get in there and kind of see what's available for you. So that shouldn't be a problem. So you will want to go ahead and set up a time to chat with one of our consultants. They are going to help you optimize your project and your search. So if you're going to use 14 days, if you're going to get a free list, you might as well make sure that it's optimized, right? So go ahead and schedule that time with one of these folks. I'm going to skip because this is a test account, but you guys should definitely sign up for the strategy consultation. And then we're going to end up here. I'm going to go through this number one, and then I'm going to wait for everybody. So once you get through this like number one version, Darlene, anyone else that's following along with me, I'm sorry, new, I don't know your name, but for you as well, give me a thumbs up when you kind of get through number one here. But essentially, I'm just going to tell them where I'm located. I'm in Colorado. So I'm just going to tell them I'm in Denver County, Colorado. And tell them my fiscal year. And then I'm going to end up here on this project overview section. Tori, good, thank you. So Tori, Darlene, anyone else who's following along with me, I don't want to go too quick. So once you get to this like project overview, you might just give me a little bit of a thumbs up and we'll start walking through it. In the meantime, yeah, Cheryl, follow along with me anyway. I think you'll find some interesting stuff there. And Danielle, thanks for the thumbs up. Thanks everyone for being so engaging. I really appreciate it. Nina, thank you. Great. So we are now on the project overview. This section and the next section, project details, are probably the most important here. And we want to think about projects as being a dedicated workspace for our funding. So thinking about a specific need for funding. So again, going back to my example, if I'm a Meals on Wheels program and I need a new vehicle, this is kind of how I want to think about my project. For the purposes of this demo, I'm actually going to use an example of an organization that I volunteer with. This organization does entrepreneurship training for small businesses, primarily run by immigrants in my area. So they kind of help them with some business education and training, get them set up with a lot of services, lawyers, accountants, stuff like that. And then they also have a fund, so they kind of help promote that as well. But most recently, what they've done is they're developing a new curriculum around kind of business education. So that's what we're going to pretend we're doing today. So we are going to say that we are going to develop a new curriculum. So my name of my project here is going to be curriculum development. And then I'm going to tell them a little bit about myself. I'm a nonprofit. I am not applying for grants as an individual, so that doesn't matter. So I'm going to hit save and continue. Oops, I did click that. I didn't like that. Now it's going to ask me about if I want to see grants specifically for faith-based organizations. And I know, I think it was it you, Danielle, who said that you're working on some faith-based stuff. So you'll want to hit yes here. And then I always suggest leave on both faith-based and secular. Don't just choose one or the other, because you'll cast a sort of less wide net, and we want to go wide on our sort of first pass here. I'm going to hit no because I'm not faith-based for the purposes of this demo, but Danielle and anyone else who is faith-based, feel free to use that option. All right, now I'm going to tell them where I am located. I am inside the US and I am specific. And this is an important thing to note. I'm curious how many of you are national in scope in terms of kind of where you're focusing. I'm going to go through this really quick. If any of you are national in scope, go ahead and drop a little something in the chat and I can dig deeper on this. But I want to choose specific areas, even if I am national in scope. And the reason for that is because a lot of grant makers get really granular in terms of the geography. So even if they fund, okay, good, Tori. Even if they fund organizations from California to Maine, they are still going to kind of list their opportunities under specific geographies. So if you say you're national in scope, you actually may end up not getting a lot of the opportunities that are available. So what I suggest for you, Tori, and for anyone else who's national in scope here, is to think about maybe what are some specific areas that you have a lot of impact in. So do you like have a lot of folks in Texas, for example, then you might want to click that. So just thinking about kind of drilling down a little bit deeper. But for the purposes of ours, I'm in Colorado. I'm going to say everywhere in Colorado. And because we butt right up against Wyoming, we actually do a lot of work with Wyoming as well. So I'm going to click that as well. Cool. So I've told them where I'm located. Now I go into fields of work. This is a pretty important piece. Yeah, exactly, Tori. Select those 10 states. I'm going to tell them now, like, what are the areas that I'm working in? If you're new to this, I would say go through and kind of look at some of these options and see what makes the most sense to you. I'm going to start with community and human services because that's what makes the most sense here. But I'm going to kind of scroll down. Let's see what's in here. Community services, definitely. What else do we have here? Economic rights and justice. Yes, we do work on that. We do work on entrepreneurship. For sure, for sure. And I think that's probably immigrant services. Yes, that's definitely included here. Cool. And then because this is a curriculum, I'm also going to kind of drill into education and see what I can find there. Definitely business education. And I'm also going to do, I think that's it. So I've chosen 5, which is a really nice kind of in between. I know it says 1 to 10. I always say 3 to 7, I think is a little bit more accurate. So I'm clicking those. This is what's going to tell the algorithm what types of opportunities to pull for me. So this is a pretty important piece. This is also a piece that once you get on that call, which I suggested earlier that you guys set up, they're going to help you really dial this in and make sure that it's like optimal. So don't stress if you're picking a couple things and you're like, there's too many options. Our consultants, our project folks and experts will help walk you through all of that when you get on the phone with them. I like to set a floor on my grants. I think anything less than 1,000 is maybe not totally worth the effort, but do whatever you want there. And then I want to decide what I'm using the funds for. So we talked a little bit about this earlier, right? What is this grant maker going to allow me to use funds for? In this sense, I'm going to say general operating expense is definitely a program, definitely education. And I'm going to say training and capacity building too. I think it's everything. Yeah, I think so, Beth. I think that's probably right. I would say go ahead and choose that, and then when you get on the phone with our folks, they can help you find kind of the right thing. But I think if you're thinking about like actually training your staff, you definitely want to choose this like training and capacity in this lower section. Because that's definitely going to be about kind of training your team as well. Oh yeah, definitely, Beth. I think so. Yeah, then that's correct. Okay, cool. Oops, I'm click that. Okay, I'm gonna hit save and exit. All right, if you're following along with me, give me a thumbs up when you get to this screen, which is going to tell you how many good fit grant opportunities you have, which is awesome. And then really quickly, I'm just going to show you a couple things in here that will help us to really prioritize our opportunities and figure out what is really a good fit. I see a thumbs up from Darlene. Thank you. And I will just give you all a minute, but essentially I have already found 384 grants that work for this project that I just suggested. 220 from foundations, 86 from corporates, and 21 from government. So I've got lots of options here. And now we've got the fun job of kind of going through using some of those questions that we talked about earlier and really determining like, where do we want to start? You know, where do we want to prioritize? What do we want to sort of begin the process with? So if you're following along with me, give me a thumbs up when you kind of get to this point. I'll sip of my coffee while I wait for you all. When I do, I'll wait for you right here. Okay, we've got another thumbs up. When I get one more, we'll keep moving. Danielle gave me one. Great. I'm going to start moving. I will move slowly if any of you are sort of still catching up. Again, when you get on the phone with our team, they're going to be able to help you through a lot of that stuff as well. So don't stress out if you don't feel like you have it optimized right now. Cool. So what I am seeing here may look a little familiar to you all. It may look a little bit like an email inbox. And that's kind of how we want to think about it. We want to think about it like an email inbox, right? We want to think about it as if it is kind of specific for my organization. These are grants that fit my organization. They came straight to me. On this sort of left-hand side here, we're in our matches tab. We're on our funding opportunity matches, and this is going to be all active grant opportunities. If it's in this tab here, it's open and you can apply for it. So that means you are not going to have to cross-reference. You don't see it, then need to go to the website and make sure that it's open. It's open, it's active, and you can apply for it. So let's click on one of these, for example, and I will kind of walk us through what we're looking at here. So I've clicked on this one here, SVP Denver Capacity Building Engagement Grants from the Denver Foundation. And on the right-hand side, I can get more information on this funder. So I can see things like, what's their process? You know, how do they do this? I'm going to have to complete an 8 to 12 week process with a bunch of other organizations. That could be interesting, right? They also do have a way to do this through individual projects. It's also going to tell me a little bit about kind of what's involved here, what they're going to ask of me, right? And remember, we talked about those internal bandwidth questions. So this is a great way to think about that. You know, can I meet this? You know, can I identify the capacity building areas that I want to work on and then show them to them, right? Can I actually employ a work plan that's going to follow a logic model? Do I have the bandwidth for that, right? And I think I do. So I'm going to kind of dig a little bit deeper here. I'm going to go into this tab, Funder 990 report. And this is where the good stuff is, I think. So this is going to be where I can find things like total assets, right? So 850 million. So we can assume if we think 5% that they're giving a good bit. Looks like they actually gave just shy of $100 million in 2019. If I scroll down a little bit more and I get into key financial stats, I can see how much they've given over the years. And this is great because this is telling me they're giving more each year. They're sort of on the way up, right? They're not petering out. This tab here is going to show me what the median is. So I can see, like, does this match me? It looks like their median is around $20,000, which is like a healthy grant. So depending on kind of what my specific needs are for my curriculum building, this one grant could potentially meet my whole needs. So that could make it a really good fit for me. I can also see a little bit more in terms of kind of how grant sizes looked. I can see past grantees. So look, they're most active in Colorado. That's fantastic. That's where I am. It does look like they serve kind of across the country, but mostly they're in Colorado. And if I want to see specifically who they funded in Colorado, I can kind of filter for that. And I can come down and see, do I know any of these organizations? Do any of them, are any of them folks that I could reach out to? I can also see here in this column kind of what the purpose was. Looks like a lot of general operating expenses, general operating, general support. This is great. This means that they're really open for how I use their funds, which is fantastic, right? So we like that a lot. I can come down here and I can also see what is their openness to new grantees versus repeat grantees. So it looks like in 2019, they gave 26-ish% of their funds to new grantees. That's a little low. It's a little below that 30% mark that I mentioned earlier, but it is still, I think, pretty close and probably worth kind of prioritizing, right? Cool. So let's say that I really like this. I'm going to go ahead and save it. I'm going to add it to my tracker and I'm going to say, I think I'm ready to go ahead and start working on an application. So I'm going to hit plans and I'm going to say, we want $20,000 from them. That's what we think it's going to cost. And we know that that fits within their median. So that's great. Their submission goal, let's say we want to get this done by the end of the year, right? So let's say December 31st. Then I can add a note, right? So I can say something like, I can add a note maybe to my team that says we need to determine who they've given to in the past and if we have any connects there. I'm gonna hit save. From there, it looks like it disappeared, but it didn't disappear. It just went into my tracker. I'm gonna click on tracker and I'm gonna be able to see all of this stuff here. Let me just run through this really quickly for you guys. But I can add a task. So if I've got a team member, I can say, do the research, finish research on connects, right? And I can set a deadline for, maybe November 4th. And I can assign it to someone on my team and I can hit done. And now that's going to be in there. I can also add any documents that are relevant. So essentially what you can see here is that we move really easily between determining whether or not this is a good funder and having all the information that we need at our fingertips, and then being able to really quickly and easily kind of convey that to our team and set up that process of like, what are the next 3 things that we need to do to be able to hit this deadline. So, all right, so that is a little bit on how we use Instrumentl and how we use, so I'm going to go ahead and still share my screen so we can run through the last little bits here. But how we kind of use Instrumentl to help us really find good fit funders and how we kind of think about what are the key questions that we want to ask going forward. So, all right, so what have we done today? Well, we talked about why grants are so important, how they help us to diversify our funding. We've also talked a little bit about how you can use Instrumentl to do a lot of that heavy lifting of sort of doing the prospect research, and also how we can use it to kind of keep everything straight going forward. Other things we looked at was what prospect research is, why it's so important, and of course we went through that 16 questions that are so important. I'm going to go ahead and share our freebie with you all. So this is, I'm dropping in the chat. You can go ahead and click that link to get that. But you can get our ultimate go versus no go grant RFP evaluation tool, which is a very long name. But it is a really great tool. It's going to have those 16 questions that we talked about earlier and a lot more really helpful information to think about as we begin the process of prospecting. So go ahead and click that, totally free. You can go ahead and grab that. Like I mentioned, if you want more grant related and nonprofit related content, you might check out some of our folks. Cheryl, which link did you not get? I'm going to drop them all. So here's our sign up link in case you want to try Instrumentl for 14 days for free and kind of walk through that process that I gave you a minute ago. And then here is the link for our freebies. And then I'm also dropping the events link. So there's 3 links in there in the chat. You all can kind of choose what you need. I am also going to follow up with you here in just a minute with an email that has all of this information as well. So that's pretty much it for me. Thank you all so much for participating. Great interaction in the chat. I really appreciate it all. Hopefully you learned some things. Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope that all of you have a great rest of your week. All right. And happy almost Halloween. All right. Thanks, everyone.